Mom said, "You're nothing but a failure." Those words burned into me like fire on bare skin. They weren't whispered in anger. They weren't thrown out in the heat of a fight. No. My mother looked me dead in the eyes, her lips pressed tight, her voice calm but sharp, as if she were handing me my life's verdict. She said it in front of everyone, my father, my siblings, even my cousin who had just gotten into law school. I remember my knees locking, my chest tightening, and the air in the room turning heavy, like someone had wrapped chains around my lungs. And the worst part? They all agreed with her. I saw it in their eyes. The disappointment, the disgust, the quiet relief that someone finally said aloud what they all had been thinking for years. My heart didn't just break that day, it shattered. Every failure I'd ever lived through flashed before me. The failed exams, the businesses that collapsed before they began, the jobs I was fired from, the relationships that slipped through my hands. I was the girl who couldn't do anything right, the girl everyone bet against. But little did they know, that was the day everything changed. The day the ground beneath me shifted. The day my curse turned into my revenge. Because the very words that were meant to bury me became the fire that made me unstoppable. And when that day finally arrived, the day the world had to stand still and see me for who I truly was, my mother's face said it all. But before I tell you about that moment, you need to understand where I came from. You need to know why they gave up on me, why they buried me before I even had the chance to rise. So let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Rachel Carter. I was born into what most people would call an American dream family. My father, Thomas, was a stern but hardworking businessman who built his company from the ground up. My mother, Evelyn, was the kind of woman people admired, always perfectly put together, her smile warm enough to melt the iciest heart. Together, they raised me and my two siblings, James and Anna, in a house that had everything, a backyard big enough for summer barbecues, vacations to Disney, and shelves lined with trophies. Not mine, of course. James, my older brother, was the star. Straight A's, varsity basketball, and later, scholarships that carried him to law school. Anna, the youngest, was the golden child, sharp, beautiful, and with a natural charm that got her everything she wanted. Then there was me, the middle child, the mistake. At least, that's what it always felt like. My parents gave me the best schools, tutors, even piano lessons I begged to quit but wasn't allowed to. Yet, no matter what they poured into me, it was like water leaking through a broken jug. I failed math, I flunked science, I barely scraped by in English. By the time I reached college, I was already branded as the one who couldn't make it. Still, they tried. My father pulled strings to get me into a decent college. I promised myself I would prove everyone wrong. I studied late into the night, drank too much coffee, and prayed for miracles. But when grades came out, failure again. One semester, then another, then academic probation. I watched my friends graduate. I watched James give speeches at award dinners. I watched Anna win pageants and get accepted into programs I couldn't even dream of. Me? I got whispers, smirks, my own cousins avoiding me like I was carrying some contagious disease called failure. Then came the jobs. First one at a bookstore, fired for being late too many times. Second, at a diner, fired for dropping plates and messing up orders. Then a string of opportunities my father handed me through his connections, all of which ended in disaster. I wasn't just unlucky, I was cursed. At least, that's what it felt like. The worst part wasn't even the failures themselves. It was watching the love in my parents' eyes dim, little by little, until one day it was gone. They stopped believing in me. They stopped defending me. And finally, the day my mother told me I was nothing but a failure, they stopped seeing me at all. But here's what they didn't know. Life wasn't done with me yet. The universe had one last twist waiting. It came on a night I'll never forget, a night where despair pushed me into a corner so dark I almost never came back from it. That was the night everything started to change. And it began with a knock on the door. A knock that would drag me into a world of blood, betrayal, and consequences I never thought I'd survive. To be continued. If you're hooked right now, don't forget to like, Watch and subscribe for more, because trust me, what comes next will leave you breathless. The knock came again, louder this time. I froze, sitting on the edge of my bed with crumpled tissues around me. My eyes were swollen from crying, my body drained of every ounce of energy. I wasn't expecting anyone. Nobody visited me anymore. For a second, I thought it was my mom, maybe coming to check if I was okay after those brutal words she'd thrown at me. But then I laughed bitterly. Evelyn Carter never checked. Not anymore. I dragged myself to the door and pulled it open. Standing there was a man in a dark suit, his face pale under the porch light. He looked like someone out of a crime show, sharp jawline, neat tie, and eyes that felt like they could see through me. "Rachel Carter?" he asked. "Yes, that's me." My voice trembled. He handed me a thick envelope. "You've been served." My stomach dropped. What? But he didn't explain. He just walked away, disappearing into the night, leaving me clutching the envelope like it was a ticking bomb. With shaking hands, I tore it open. The words on the first page felt unreal, like they weren't meant for me. State of Illinois versus Rachel Carter. Fraud investigation. Fraud? Me? I couldn't even pass my college classes, let alone pull off fraud. I flipped through the papers, my breath coming fast, my eyes blurring. It listed bank accounts I didn't recognize, transactions I'd never made, companies I'd never even heard of, all tied to my name. I dropped the envelope on the floor, my mind spinning. Was this some mistake? Or was this the final curse? The universe's way of making sure I stayed at the bottom forever? By morning, the entire house knew. My father's voice boomed through the kitchen. "Rachel, do you even understand what this means? Fraud is a federal crime. Do you know what kind of prison time you're facing?" "I didn't do this," I shouted back, tears stinging my eyes. "I swear I didn't." But no one believed me. Not even Anna, who had always been the softer one. She shook her head, pity dripping from her voice. "Rachel, maybe you just got involved with the wrong people. You always make bad choices." Bad choices. Failures. Fraud. That's all I was to them now. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a courtroom, my hands cold and clammy, listening as prosecutors laid out their case. Bank transfers. Emails. Signed documents. All with my name. My lawyer, a public defender because my father refused to spend a dime on me, looked at me with dead eyes that screamed, "We're going to lose." When the judge denied bail, my knees buckled. That's how I ended up spending my first night in county jail, lying on a thin mattress that smelled like bleach and sweat, staring at the ceiling, wondering how my life had fallen this far. But something happened in there, something I didn't expect. In jail, I met people who had nothing. No family, no money, no future. And yet, some of them carried a fire inside them I'd never seen before. A kind of fight I didn't know existed. They didn't look at me like a failure. They looked at me like one of their own. One woman in particular, her name was Cassandra, took me under her wing. She had tattoos up her arms and scars that told stories she never spoke about. One night, she leaned close and whispered, "You're not here because you're guilty. You're here because someone wanted you out of the way." Her words hit me like lightning. Out of the way? Who would want me out of the way? I thought about it for days, replaying every face, every conversation. And then it hit me, James. My perfect, successful lawyer brother. He had access to everything. He knew the law. He knew how to make things disappear or appear. He also had the most to gain if I was gone, if I became the family disgrace forever. It made too much sense. And when I told Cassandra, she just smiled darkly. Then you know what you have to do. Revenge. For the first time in my life, I felt a spark, like I wasn't powerless anymore. Like maybe, just maybe, I could flip the script. But I didn't get long to dream. Because 3 nights later, the prison alarm screamed. The entire block went dark. Metal clanged. Guards shouted. And when I sat up in my bunk, I saw something I'll never forget. A woman's body, hanging from the bars across the cell. And the guards running straight toward me. The scream ripped through the block before I could even process what I was seeing. The woman's body swayed against the bars, her lifeless face pale under the flickering emergency lights. Prison is no stranger to violence, but something about this scene was wrong. Too neat. Too sudden. The guards stormed in, flashlights cutting through the dark.
One of them pointed at me.
"Carter, on your knees."
"What?"
No, I didn't."
"Now."
The beam of a flashlight hit me in the eyes, blinding me as they yanked me off my bunk and slammed me to the ground. My face pressed into the cold concrete, the taste of iron filling my mouth as a knee dug into my back. She was alive when I went to sleep. I shouted, my voice cracking. I didn't touch her, but none of them cared. In their eyes, I wasn't just a failure anymore. I was a murderer. They dragged me to solitary confinement, a concrete box where light barely touched the corners and silence felt like it could drive you insane. Hours turned into days. I replayed every second in my head. Cassandra's whispers. James's cold smirk in court. My mother's words. "You're nothing but a failure." Failure. 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 But this wasn't failure. This was a setup. I could feel it. Someone wanted me erased completely, my reputation, my freedom, my life. After 6 days in solitary, the warden finally came to see me. His suit was too neat for a prison, his voice too calm. "Rachel Carter, you're being charged with second-degree murder." My ears rang. My knees nearly gave out. Murder. The word echoed in my head like a death sentence. But I didn't do it. I screamed. "You have to believe me." The warden's eyes were cold, detached. "Tell it to the judge." Back in the courtroom, the family section was filled. My father with his arms crossed, my mother's lips pressed into that same disapproving line, Anna whispering to James. And James? He sat tall, his expensive suit gleaming, his eyes locked on me with the faintest trace of a smile. That's when it clicked. The fraud charges weren't enough. No, James needed me buried deeper. If I disappeared behind bars forever, there'd be no one left to challenge his perfect image, no one to reveal whatever secrets he was hiding. He wasn't just my brother anymore. He was my executioner. The trial was a blur of lies and planted evidence. Inmates who swore they saw me do it. A guard who claimed I had motive. My own lawyer barely lifted a finger. Every word spoken in that courtroom was designed to crush me further into the ground. But then, something unexpected happened. As the prosecution paraded witness after witness, one figure stood up in the back of the room. Cassandra. She wasn't supposed to be there. She was still locked up. But somehow, she made it into the courtroom. Her voice cut through the noise as she shouted. "Rachel Carter is innocent. They're framing her." The judge slammed his gavel. Guards rushed to drag her out, but not before she shouted one last thing, something that froze me in my seat. "Check the footage. The cameras will tell the truth." Footage. My heart pounded. I remembered seeing cameras on the block. But would anyone actually check them? Or would James make sure they vanished, just like everything else? For the first time, the courtroom shifted. Whispers spread. The judge's brows furrowed. My lawyer leaned toward me, his eyes wide. "If there's footage." But before anything could move forward, the doors of the courtroom slammed open. 2 officers stormed in, dragging a bloodied man in handcuffs. His suit was torn, his face bruised, but I knew him instantly.
James.
My perfect brother. And when the officer announced why he was being brought in, the entire courtroom gasped. Thomas James Carter, arrested on suspicion of homicide. The world tilted. My father staggered. My mother let out a choked cry. And me? For the first time in years, I felt the weight of failure begin to crack. Because maybe, just maybe, the truth was finally clawing its way to the surface. The courtroom erupted into chaos the second James was dragged inside. "Order! Order in the court!" the judge roared, slamming his gavel. But no one listened. My mother's hands shook as she tried to reach for James. My father, red-faced and trembling, barked at the officers. There must be some mistake. My son is a lawyer. He knows the law better than anyone. But the officers didn't waver. One of them shoved James forward, his cuffed hands rattling. And then James looked at me. That smile. That smug, bitter smile. Even in handcuffs, even with blood dripping from his lip, he looked at me like he was still winning. "Sit him down," the judge demanded. "I want an explanation."
Now.
The prosecutor stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Your Honor, Thomas James Carter has been taken into custody after being connected to a homicide investigation involving a business associate. Evidence directly ties him to the crime scene. We believe further inquiry will also reveal connections between Mr. Carter and the fabricated charges against his sister, Rachel Carter." Gasps filled the room. My heart thundered in my chest. Fabricated charges. Those two words wrapped around me like chains breaking apart. For the first time, someone had spoken the truth in this nightmare. James's lawyer shot up, objecting, demanding the statement be stricken, but the judge waved him down. The judge's eyes narrowed as he studied James, then turned toward me. "Miss Carter," he said slowly, "if what has just been presented holds, it appears you may have been unjustly accused." The words were like oxygen flooding my starving lungs. But before relief could settle, James leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at his mouth. "You think you've won, Rachel?" he muttered, his voice low but audible enough for me to hear. "You don't even know what game you're playing." His eyes burned into me, promising something far darker than prison walls. The hearing adjourned in chaos. I was escorted back to county jail, but for the first time, the guards treated me differently. No shoves, no sneers, just silence. Maybe they were beginning to see I wasn't the villain. That night, Cassandra whispered through the bars of her cell next to mine.
"See?
The cracks are showing. But careful, Rachel. Men like your brother don't fall without dragging others down with them."
Her warning stuck with me.
And she was right. Because 2 days later, everything exploded again. I was summoned to a private visitation room. My stomach knotted, thinking maybe, just maybe, it was my mother coming to apologize, to finally take my hand and tell me I wasn't the disgrace she'd branded me as. But when the door opened, it wasn't her. It was a federal agent. He dropped a thick file onto the table. The folder snapped open, and photographs spilled across the surface.
Pictures of me.
Pictures of James. Pictures of bank accounts, crime scenes, even shadowy figures I didn't recognize. "You're in deep, Rachel," the agent said, his tone sharp. "And if you want out, you're going to have to help us. Your brother isn't just guilty of fraud. He's tied to something much bigger: money laundering, organized crime, maybe even murder for hire. We've been investigating him for years." My throat went dry. Murder for hire? James? My golden boy brother, who my parents worshipped? The agent leaned closer. "We need you to testify. You're the only one who can bring him down from the inside." I shook my head. "You don't understand. If I go against him, he'll kill me. He'll kill all of us." The agent's voice dropped. "Then you better make a choice, Rachel. Either you help us, or you go down with him." I felt the room closing in, the air thick like smoke. My mind spun between fear, rage, and the echo of my mother's words. "You're nothing but a failure."
No.
Not this time. I wouldn't be their failure anymore. But before I could answer, the lights flickered. Then, a deafening boom rattled the walls. The entire prison shook. Alarms screamed. Guards shouted. Smoke poured under the door. And in the chaos, one thought slammed into me like a freight train. This wasn't random. Someone wanted me dead. The boom rattled through my chest, so loud it felt like my heart skipped a beat. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Sirens wailed, guards scrambled, and the sharp sting of smoke clawed at my throat.
"Down."
"Everybody down," one guard screamed, waving his rifle as inmates shrieked and ducked for cover. But I knew this wasn't just some freak accident. Someone planned this. And whoever it was, their target wasn't the prison. It was me. The door to the visitation room slammed open. 2 masked men in black stormed in through the haze, moving with precision. My blood froze. They weren't there for a riot. They were there for a hit. "Rachel Carter," one of them barked. His voice was muffled under the mask, but the way he said my name made my stomach twist. I stumbled back. "Who sent you?" The taller one raised a gun, his gloved hand steady. Let's just say someone who doesn't like unfinished business. Before he could pull the trigger, chaos erupted outside the door. Shots rang out. Officers shouted. Smoke grenades hissed. The masked men turned their heads just long enough for me to dive under the table. My hands shook so hard I could barely breathe. Then, I heard a familiar voice cut through the madness. Get her out.
Now.
The federal agent. The same one who had shown me James's file. He stormed in with 2 officers, guns drawn, engaging the masked men in a firefight that rattled the room. Bullets tore into the walls. Glass shattered. One masked man went down screaming. The other vanished into the smoke. The agent grabbed me by the arm and yanked me to my feet. Move, Rachel. They're not going to stop until you're dead. I stumbled, coughing, as he dragged me through a maze of chaos, alarms blaring, inmates rioting, guards trying to regain control. My ears rang, my legs felt like jelly, but somehow, I kept moving. We burst through a side exit into the cold night air. Flashing lights, sirens, and armored trucks surrounded the prison. The agent shoved me into the back of an unmarked car. The door slammed shut. For the first time since that knock on my front door weeks ago, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was safe. But safety came with a cost. The agent slid into the driver's seat, his jaw tight. Now do you understand, Rachel? This isn't about fraud or even that murder charge. Your brother's network runs deeper than you think. If you don't help us, he wins. And if he wins, he glanced at me through the rearview mirror. You won't live long enough to regret it. His words stuck to me like glue. I thought of my mother's cold face, my father's silence, James's smug smirk. All of them had given up on me. Maybe this was my chance, not just to survive, but to finally prove them wrong. I swallowed hard. What do you need me to do? The agent's eyes flicked back to mine, sharp and assessing. We need evidence. Documents. Emails. Something only a family member would know how to access. If we can connect your brother to his offshore accounts and the killings tied to them, we can end this. I nodded, even as fear gnawed at my stomach. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about revenge. And if James wanted me erased, then I was going to make sure the whole world saw him for what he truly was before he could finish the job. But I didn't have time to dwell on my decision. Because just as the agent pulled the car onto the highway, headlights flared in the rearview mirror. A black SUV swerved into our lane, ramming hard against our side. The car jolted, tires screeching. My head slammed against the window. Another hit, harder this time. The agent cursed. Hold on. The SUV rammed again, and this time, the glass shattered. A masked man leaned out of the window, gun aimed directly at me. The trigger pulled, and the world went black. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I felt was the throbbing pain in my skull. My vision blurred, swimming with streaks of light and shadow. I tried to move, but my wrists were bound, the cold bite of zip ties cutting into my skin. The air was damp, heavy with the stench of gasoline and mildew. My head rested against the rough floor of what looked like an abandoned warehouse. I wasn't dead.
Not yet.
But I wasn't free either. Slowly, my vision cleared and I saw him, standing just a few feet away, his back to me, speaking quietly into a phone. My heart dropped to my stomach.
James.
My brother. My betrayer. The golden boy who'd built his empire on lies. Yes, she's here, he was saying. His voice was calm, steady, like he was discussing dinner plans. No mistakes this time. By morning, she'll be nothing but a memory. I froze. The words cut deeper than the zip ties ever could. James turned, his eyes landing on me. He ended the call and slid the phone into his pocket, then crouched down so his face was inches from mine. You just don't get it, do you? He whispered, his smile sharp as glass. You were never meant to win. I've carried this family on my back for years. Dad's respect? Mom's love? Anna's admiration? That was mine. And you were just the embarrassing shadow they wished would disappear. His words stabbed at me, but this time, they didn't sink in the way they once did. Maybe because I'd already been broken. Maybe because Cassandra's warning still echoed in my head. Or maybe because I could finally see the truth. My brother wasn't invincible. He was desperate. You set me up, I spat, my voice hoarse.
Fraud.
Murder. Now this.
Why?
Why not just leave me to rot? James's smile widened, but his eyes hardened. Because rot isn't enough. You were the loose thread, Rachel. The failure. And loose threads have to be cut before they unravel everything. He stood, brushing dust off his suit jacket, and walked to a nearby table where a handgun gleamed under the dim light. My breath caught. This was it. I twisted against the zip ties, my skin burning. My heart pounded so hard I thought my ribs would crack. Panic clawed at me, but underneath it, something else stirred, rage. The same rage that had been simmering since the day Mom looked me in the eyes and said I was nothing but a failure. Not this time. Not anymore. Just as James picked up the gun, a sudden crash echoed through the warehouse. The door burst open, light flooding the room. Dozens of armed agents stormed in, shouting commands, their guns raised. FBI. Drop the weapon. James froze. For the first time, I saw fear flicker across his face. He raised the gun, but instead of pointing it at me, he turned it on the agents. James, don't. I screamed. But he didn't listen. Shots rang out. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Bullets flying, metal clanging, officers shouting. I ducked behind a crate, zip ties still biting into my wrists, heart hammering in my throat. Through the smoke and flashes, I saw James dart toward a side exit, shoving past agents, firing wildly. And then, silence. The smoke cleared. James was gone. The lead agent ran to me, cutting the ties from my wrists. My hands shook as freedom returned to my fingers. We almost lost you, he said. His voice was sharp, but there was relief in his eyes. I swallowed hard, my body trembling. Where is he? The agent's jaw tightened. He escaped. But not for long. We'll track him down. But deep down, I knew better. James wasn't the kind of man you track down. He was the kind who always stayed one step ahead. And if he had slipped away tonight, it meant he wasn't done with me. Because if there was one thing James Carter hated more than failure, it was losing. And this time, I wasn't just his sister. I was his enemy. That night, as I sat in protective custody, staring at the four walls of yet another cold room, I made a vow. If my brother wanted war, I would give him war. But before I could even begin planning my revenge, the news broke across every channel. Prominent lawyer Thomas James Carter linked to secret crime network, federal manhunt underway. And then, seconds later, the anchor's voice dropped, grave and chilling. But in a shocking twist, his parents, Thomas and Evelyn Carter, have also been taken into custody on charges of aiding and abetting. I dropped the remote. My blood turned to ice. My own parents. The ones who told me I was a failure. They weren't innocent at all. The words from the TV wouldn't stop echoing in my ears. Thomas and Evelyn Carter, aiding and abetting. My parents. For years, they looked at me with shame. For years, they told me I was the one dragging the family name through the mud. For years, they said I was the failure. But now the world knew the truth. They weren't victims of James's lies. They were part of it. The agent overseeing my protective custody paced the room, phone glued to his ear. I barely heard his words over the pounding of my own thoughts. Betrayal wrapped around me like barbed wire, cutting deeper the more I tried to make sense of it. I remembered my mother's voice so vividly. You're nothing but a failure. Now I realized it wasn't disappointment in me. It was projection. She wasn't angry at my failures. She was terrified I'd one day uncover theirs. The door to my holding room creaked open. The agent put his phone down. Rachel, your parents have asked to see you. My chest tightened. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. No, I whispered. I don't want to see them.
But part of me needed to.
Not for closure. Not for forgiveness. But for answers. Minutes later, I was led into a sterile visitation chamber. My parents sat on the other side of the glass, both in orange jumpsuits. The sight almost made me laugh. Evelyn Carter, the perfect housewife, stripped of her pearls and pressed blouses. Thomas Carter, the proud businessman, shackled like the criminals he always pretended to rise above. I picked up the phone on my side of the glass. My mother did the same, her hand trembling slightly. "Rachel," she began, her voice softer than I'd ever heard. "Sweetheart, you have to understand, we only did what we thought was best for the family." The rage bubbled up so fast I could barely contain it. "Best for the family? You set me up. You stood by James. You let me rot in jail while you smiled and nodded and told the world I was worthless." My father's voice thundered through the receiver. "Watch your tone, Rachel. You wouldn't understand the kind of pressure we were under. James was our way in, our ticket to power. Everything we did was to protect what we built." My hands shook as I gripped the phone. "And what about me? Was I just disposable? A pawn you could sacrifice when things got messy?" Neither of them answered. And in that silence, I got all the confirmation I needed. "Yes," I said quietly. "That's exactly what I was to you." My mother's eyes filled with tears. For a brief second, I saw guilt, real, raw guilt. But then she straightened her back, and her mask returned. "You'll never survive without us, Rachel. You're not strong enough." That was it. That was the last thread snapping. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. "You've been wrong about me my whole life. And I'm going to prove it. Not just to you, to the whole world." I dropped the phone back on the receiver and stood. For once, I didn't look back. The agents led me out, their radios buzzing with chatter about James still being at large. My heart hammered, not from fear anymore, but from resolve. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It wasn't even just about revenge. It was about ending the Carter legacy of lies once and for all. Later that night, as I sat in the safe house flipping through the files the feds had gathered, I realized something terrifying. James wasn't just running. He was planning. Bank transfers were still moving. Offshore accounts were still active. He was out there, regrouping, building something bigger. And then, just as the agent returned from a briefing, his face pale, I knew my instincts were right. "We just intercepted a call," he said, his voice tight. "James is coming back to Chicago. He's not running anymore. He's coming for you." The room spun. My brother, the man who had destroyed my life piece by piece, wasn't hiding. He was hunting. And the final confrontation was no longer avoidable. Chicago at night always felt alive. Sirens wailing in the distance, skyscrapers glowing like sentinels in the dark, the hum of traffic weaving through the city. But that night, it felt like the city itself was holding its breath. Because James was back. The federal agents set the trap carefully. They wired me, gave me an untraceable phone, and rehearsed the plan over and over. My job was simple: meet James at the location he demanded, keep him talking, and let the FBI move in. Simple. Except nothing with James was ever simple. The meeting place was an abandoned high-rise downtown. The kind of place where the air smelled like dust and old secrets, where the wind howled through broken windows. Every step I took echoed up the stairwell, my pulse quickening as I climbed to the top floor. When I pushed the door open, there he was, standing against the skyline, city lights framing him like some dark king surveying his empire. He turned, that same cold smirk curling on his lips. Well, the failure finally shows up. His voice sliced through me, dragging back every memory, every insult, every betrayal, every time my family looked at me and saw nothing.
But I didn't flinch this time.
"You ruined me," I said, steady. "Fraud, murder, prison, you tried to bury me." He chuckled, stepping closer. "Tried? Rachel, I succeeded. You've always been nothing. I just made sure the world finally saw it." I met his gaze.
"No."
"You made me stronger. And now the world sees you for what you are." His eyes narrowed, and I knew he sensed it. The wires, the trap. "You think you're smart," he hissed. "You think the FBI's going to save you? They'll cut a deal with me before they ever let you walk out of here clean. You'll still be the failure. You'll always be the failure." Something in me snapped. I stepped forward, jabbing a finger at his chest.
No.
I'm the survivor. I'm the one you couldn't kill. And when Mom said I was nothing but a failure, she was wrong. You all were. For the first time, James faltered. His smirk wavered, just enough for me to see the cracks in his armor. But then, like the devil he was, he drew a gun from his jacket. If I can't bury you with lies, I'll bury you with this. Time slowed. The gun lifted. My breath caught, and before I could even scream, a red bloomed on his chest. Crack. The sniper's shot tore through the room, dropping James to his knees. His gun clattered across the floor as he fell backward, shock painted across his face. Agents swarmed in, shouting commands, weapons drawn. But James's eyes never left mine. Even as the life drained out of him, he whispered one last word. Failure. And then he was gone. I don't remember how long I stood there, staring at his body. All I know is that the weight of years lifted off me in that single moment. Not because he was dead, but because I finally understood. Failure wasn't falling. Failure was staying down. And I was done staying down. Days later, the headlines screamed the truth. Carter family empire crumbles. Daughter breaks silence. The fraud, the murders, the crimes, they were all laid bare. My father and mother faced sentencing. Anna, my little sister, disappeared into the shadows, too ashamed to show her face. And James? James became the cautionary tale whispered in courtrooms and boardrooms across the city. And me? I stood on the courthouse steps, cameras flashing, microphones shoved toward me, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't hiding. My name is Rachel Carter, I said, my voice steady, my heart strong. For years, I was told I was nothing but a failure. But today, I stand here as proof that failure isn't the end. It's the beginning. And sometimes, the ones you call failures are the ones strong enough to bring down empires. The crowd erupted. Flashbulbs exploded. And deep inside, I felt something I'd never known before, peace. Not because I had revenge. Not because James was gone. But because I finally saw myself for who I really was. Not a failure. A survivor. And this time, the whole world knew it.